Hi everyone, welcome to Joe Glass Comics. I'm Joe Glass. I'm here to talk to you about comic books that I've been reading and I've been enjoying. And this is a bit of a Pride special. It's kind of a two-parter in a way for the comics I've been reading this week. But this particular comic deserved, I felt, a video all to its own. There's a lot of stuff to go through in there. So yeah, here's what I'm going to be talking about today. Today we're going to be talking about the very first time DC's ever done this. It's the first time actually that either of the big two comic book mainstream superheroes companies have actually done this. But DC Pride, which is the DC entry into doing a Pride Month anthology following a multitude of LGBTQ characters from across DC's universes and properties, and sort of giving them all a chance to shine, including many of them by LGBTQ creators. So it's been really awesome to check this one out. In fact, I'd say that's one element which I think the DC Pride anthology has slightly over the yet to come Marvel Voices Pride anthology, is that it seems that this one is almost entirely, as far as I can tell, by LGBTQ creators. The Marvel Voices Pride anthology definitely involves a lot of straight creators, I believe. So like I say, this is really cool to see that this is primarily by authentic queer voices. So first up, we have a Batwoman story, which is by James Tynion IV, got his name right this time, Trung Le Nguyen, Aditya Bidikar, and Jessica Chen. It's a great little story. What I love about it in particular is that it is a chance for James to actually show his empathy within the community. Quite often when he's been dealing with queer characters in any of his work, it's often been bi men or gay men, which obviously is something he can relate to, being a bi man himself. But obviously we have seen one or two other times that he's dealt with other aspects of the LGBTQ community and being able to sort of use his very great broad-ranging empathy to do it, which is like a skill which everyone should really have. And it's an incredibly powerful and useful skill because he manages to tell a story with Batwoman which really feels incredibly real, something which can easily be related to, I think, by a number of people. This idea of feeling like you're not right, that somehow the rest of the world is suggesting that you are wrong or the way you do things is wrong, and as such, what that makes you feel like. It's something which I felt was very powerful and was really gorgeous, and it was really helped by Trung's fantastic art, which is really different for a DC book, but it just looks so gorgeous. Like, I've been a fan of their work for so long, and to see it in a DC book and it just be so beautiful, I just adore this particular short. It's immediately followed up by a short which is by Steve Orlando with art by Stephen Byrne, with Josh Reed on letters and edited by Chris Conrad. The story follows Gregorio de la Vega, otherwise known as Extrano, who, for many who don't know, is actually mainstream superhero comics' first DC's definitely first gay character, very much probably mainstream superhero comics' first gay character by some way, predating North Star at Marvel, who often gets credited with that particular title. Extrano was a complicated character, to say the least. He was not incredibly well received at the time, not so much because he was a gay character, but more because he was a very stereotypical gay character. He was flamboyant, he was kind of weird looking, and he was excessively extrovert looking, and he kind of also was telling people to call him out all the time, which the thing is, that's not necessarily a bad thing or wrong, but it is very stereotypical, or particularly of what was seen of gay characters at the time. And it meant that the character didn't really come across very well and wasn't received well. The character recently resurfaced in Steve Orlando's own Apollo Midnight series, where he had undergone a whole overhaul. He was more of an elder statesman of the gay community now. He was married to another man and was raising a child, and he's kind of there and just being a lot more subdued. The Extrano we're seeing in this story is a combination of the two, I feel. He's a nice and interesting mix where he's that more subdued, more down-to-earth version of him, but he's also got some of those slightly camper elements coming through that little bit, because there's nothing wrong with being a camp man than being stereotyped. And I think that's something which Steve is showing with the way he's done now. Another thing which I particularly loved about this show, and it's a big thing which I loved in Midnighter and Apollo and Midnighter, which Steve wrote, but also a lot of what Steve writes actually There's a lot of double entendres in there. It's not explicit. It's kind of like the kind of sex jokes that you might expect in something like Shrek. Like when Shrek says, do you think he's compensating for something? The adults in the room got that, but the kids didn't. It's the same thing with some of the comments in this. There's one thing which Gregorio says in particular, which made me feel very much, I've heard that before. So yeah, I think it's a lot of fun to check out. It also has John Constantine in it as well, because he's bisexual, and that's awesome. So yeah. Next up is a short called Tribe Girl, which is by Vita Ayala, Skylar Partridge on the art, Jose Villarrubia on the colours, letters by Ariana Meyer, and edits by Andrew Shea, who is very much the editor who, as far as I can gather, is very much behind this whole project and putting it all together. So I would have to take this opportunity to say a big shout out and a big thank you to Andrew Shea. It's just absolutely amazing that you did this. I really hope this isn't going to be the end of DC Pride. I hope we're going to see more DC Pride anthologies in the future. This story, however, Tribe Girl, is following Renee Montoya in her new role as the Question. I say new role, it's new in current continuity, but she's obviously been the Question before, but it's very much the timey-wimey multiversal thing which we've got going on with DC. But if you're a new reader, don't worry. All you need to know is this character is the Question. They're a superhero without a face. They are a bit like a private dick, but with a weird penchant for kung fu. Anyway, it's a really badass story. It's filled with action. But what I think is really strong in this story is there's an element of Renee being a little bit of a fish out of water, and getting flustered about something, which is not something we often see for the character. There's also the implication that this is going to be a story which continues on, whether it be in the Batman Urban Legends series, Batman itself, or Detective Comics, we've yet to see. But like I say, I can't wait to see how it continues. I really want to see what is set up in this story play out. That's another thing actually which makes this particularly awesome. Some of these stories do feel very much like they are setting up things which are going to continue in the mainstream DC universe. I really do hope that is the case and that we're going to see them. It certainly beats out some other anthologies where these stories don't necessarily get picked up or followed up on. I really do hope we get to see it again, but like I say, that's something we will have to wait and see. Next up, we have a Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy story from Mariko Tamaki, Amy Reeder on the art, Marissa Louise on colours, and Ariana Meyer on the letters again, and again edited by Andrew Shea. It is absolutely brilliant. It's a fun story. Anyone who's watched the Harley Quinn animated TV show will love this. In fact, you don't really need to be a hardcore comic book reader to really get what's going on. If you are just a fan of the TV show, you can definitely read this story and you'll know exactly what's going on. I would say that of the majority of the stories in this anthology, actually, you don't need to be a hardcore DC reader. You can literally dip in and just enjoy some queer superheroes here. The art in this is absolutely gorgeous. Amy Reeder's expressions are just so alive, in particular with Harley. In fact, that's something which I think works quite well. Poison Ivy's expressions are a bit more like straight and human, whereas Harley Quinn gets the real exaggerated expressions, like to the point of even cartoonish elements coming out in it, which really fits the character. It's a really fun story about them discussing their relationship, which is a bit metatextual because anyone who does know a bit of the behind the scenes with DC and the Harley Quinn Poison Ivy relationship knows that there has been some pushback almost to them being a couple, and some confusion about where they stood in the comics. This is very much feels like putting that to bed and being like, no, we are a couple. This is definitely a relationship which is happening. It's also just fun as heck. Next up is a Green Lantern Alan Scott story by Sam John, with art by Klaus Janson, Dave McCaig on the colours, Tom Napolitano doing the letters, and Amedeo Tortoro on the edits for this particular story. Anyone who knows a little bit about the history of Alan Scott, he's had a sort of slightly convoluted path to being recognised as a major DC gay character. What we get here is a bit of a continuation of the story, and something which I think a lot of people felt like they needed with Iceman over at Marvel, which they didn't necessarily get, to at least to some people's satisfaction. This kind of gives us a bit of like why Alan Scott is gay now. And it's kind of, it's done very well in the sense that, like I say, it gives that explanation for how, you know, you could have a character who predominantly up till now everyone has assumed is straight, has had relationships with women and even has children, but is now saying that he's a gay man and how he's actually been gay the whole time. We find out a little bit about the history of where that comes from. It's a very heartbreaking moment, but like in the situation that it comes out, it's also quite a beautiful moment between a father and son, which is really, in my mind, quite important to see, because yeah, there's gay dads out there, there's gay dads and gay sons out there, and yes, it's really awesome to see that kind of relationship, because that is very rarely covered in comic books, let alone superhero comic books. So yeah, it's really great to have this kind of relationship now in the DC universe, with a character who's very much, well, two characters actually, who are going to be very much front and center, given that they will be part of Infinite Frontier, which is very much like the big overarching architect sort of book at the moment with DC. Next up, we have a story of the Flash. It's not the Flash you're thinking of. All out of the Flash either is in fact the non-binary Flash of an alternate Earth and future states timeline. So it's slightly ahead in DC's universe. Obviously DC has this omniverse thing going on. It's like a multiverse but multi. Basically what we got here is another Flash, just from an alternate reality, who has come to the main DC universe to be a superhero on the main DC Earth, and is in a relationship with Andy Curry, who is the daughter of Aquaman and Mira. This is written by Danny Lohr, with art by Lisa Stewart, colours by Enrica Angelini, Becca Carey does the letters, and Michael McAllister is the editor of this particular piece. It's a really great story, and I really love this for a very, very different reason. Aside from the fact that it is an LGBTQ story, which I just love, and it's also an aspect of the LGBTQ community, which is very rarely represented, it's also a fact that it actually covers the character sort of dealing with ADHD. There's something that the Flash does in this, which I actually do every day. And for a little bit of context, I'm actually in the process of trying to find out if I have ADHD. It's a long process with the NHS. It takes a little while to sort of get on the waiting list, let alone find out. But like I say, certainly all the research I've done would seem to imply that there's a very good chance that I have ADHD myself. And every day I'm seeming to pick up new things where like, oh, this might be ADHD. It's a great fun story, and adding this other element to the character, which we haven't seen as yet, really brings something to them. It creates a character who is even more fleshed out than previously been. And that's something I really love seeing with characters like this, and something which I really have to throw out there whenever someone tries to make the argument that like, oh, when you do these kind of characters, they're just tokens, they're just LGBTQ. That's just not true. There's so much to them, and they're so much more fleshed out. People who try to dismiss them as just the gay character or just the non-binary character or anything like that are really just showing their own prejudices. So really, there's more to it than just that. And if they actually took the time to read them, they would see that. But many of them don't want to read them, which is a discussion I'll get onto later. But yeah, it's kind of really awesome to see that these characters are super fleshed out and they have really interesting other aspects to them, and I think this is the most wonderful, tying back to empathy again, a lot of people are going to relate to, whether they are part of the LGBTQ community or not. And that's really awesome to see with this character. A lot of people who have ADHD are going to relate to this character, and so that even if they don't actually also relate to any kind of queer aspect of identity, they do at least relate to that, and then through that can perhaps relate to LGBTQ siblings. Next up is Big A Do Crime by the great winning team of Sina Grace, Rose Stein and Ted Brandt, Aditya Bidikar on the letters again, and Andrew Shea again with the edits. This is a really fun story with Pied Piper and introducing a new character called Drummer Boy. And what I love about it is it introduces this problem which I think a lot of queer people are going through, particularly a lot of queer businesses. And that's this sort of fact that you've got a lot of dastardly landlord tactics going on, which are slowly eroding queer spaces. Certainly it's a heavy problem here in the UK, as we're seeing vast quantities of long-standing gay presence safe spaces being diminished, taken away, lost due to excessive landlords looking to make more money by selling the properties to make flats, car parks and shops, as opposed to somewhere that someone used to go to feel safe and among their own people. Not going to spoil things at all, but yeah, it's a really badass story. We get some little awesomeness of the queer characters interacting. I'd love to see more of Drummer Boy because he's a very different body shape. Maybe I should say they. I didn't get the exact pronouns in the issue, I don't think. So there might be more to this character than we currently know. But yeah, there's plenty more, I feel, to discover with Drummer Boy. So I'm very much looking forward to it. Next up, we have Date Night, which is actually written by Nicole Maines, who stars as Nia Nahal, aka Dreamer, in CW's Supergirl TV show, and she's writing a Dreamer comic book story for this particular anthology, which is a big get, obviously, for DC. It's drawn by Rachel Stott, who is turning up some fantastic work in this issue. It's a really great drawn story, like the characters look and feel like real people, so it's really awesome. Enrique Erin Angeloni's on the colours again, with Steve Wands on letters, and edits are by Diego Lopez. It's a really great story and it's really fun, and I don't want anything to detract from that. It's really awesome to see that Nicole Maines is actually a really capable writer as well. However, what I had been thinking was going to happen in the run-up to this book was that this was going to introduce Dreamer, or this version of Dreamer, to the DCU comic books. In terms of the main DC universe, so that we would have a trans superhero in DC Comics potentially to appear again and again. This story, however, it would appear to be set in the CW Supergirl universe. Now that's awesome and that's its own thing, and that is great. I mean, it's all part of the wider DC Omniverse, so I mean, Supergirl, the show, I believe is ending, so you never know, those characters could wind up turning up in comic books to continue their story in the future, because now they're all part of the same universe in a way that they weren't before. But like I say, I was kind of hoping that this was going to be the introduction of the comic version of that character, as opposed to a continuation of the TV version of that character in comics. I could be wrong. It could just be a misunderstanding of how I've interpreted how the story's come across. It certainly feels like it's part of the show. Maybe that's just because it's written by someone who's part of the show, so it's very much that mindset. Don't know. But what the main thing is, it's a fun, awesome story. It's action-packed. It's got a really nice message right at the end. Like there's some lines, like I'm not going to read them out and spoil them, like you should read it yourself. I really recommend it. It's really powerful and really beautiful. So like I say, it's a creed which I'd really like to see more of. Then finally we have Love Life, which is written by Andrew Wheeler, with art by Luciano Veccio, Rex Lucas on colours and Becca Carey on the letters, with Michael McAllister as the editor of this particular story. This story is one I've been particularly looking forward to checking out, because this is the story which basically feels like the precursor to what would have been JLQ, or Justice League Queer, which was part of the now infamous and much discussed DC round robin. In this particular story, we see Jackson Hyde, who is Aqualad, going... In this story, we see Jackson Hyde, Aqualad, going to his very first Pride parade, and something happens there with a major DC villain. And it's really awesome to see, actually, because usually these kind of things, or these kind of characters, don't get to interact with a major villain. It kind of makes them always feel like they're not a major part of the DC universe, and that they don't deal with a big problem, but they are actually dealing with one of the biggest threats in the DC universe. So it's really interesting to see that, and kind of get that maybe that's what JLQ was going to be. It's a threat actually who talks about the queer community's righteous anger and rage, which is beneath the joy and pride that they feel, particularly in things like Pride Month and the Pride events. And I think that's really important to discuss, and something which maybe wouldn't necessarily come from a straight writer talking about the queer community. This is something which could only come from someone with a genuine queer point of view. At the end of the day, what you might have heard mentioned numerous times, but maybe don't necessarily always know what that means. Pride was a riot. The very first Pride was a protest, and that is what all Prides are now. Even when it looks like people are just partying, they're covered in glitter in their hot pants, and they're just having a good time listening to music and being with friends and just showing their love and expressing their joy. That comes as well with the case of a kind of anger and a kind of rage that we've had to use to get us to here. Thus, gay pride is in some ways built upon gay wrath, in that we had to fight to get to where we are today, and that fight is not over. Even to this day, there are people who would love to see our rights that we've fought so hard to get taken away. So for all those people who think that pride is just a party, this story serves as a nice little reminder that actually there's a lot more to that party than you might be seeing on the surface. It may not be for everyone, it may not be something that everyone thinks of it as or even uses it as, and maybe there are some who just use it as a party, but the core heart of Pride is a fight to remember our past and our history and what we have strived through to get here. The big thing I felt with this story, having read it, was just how much I really wish we had that JLQ book. In fact, the JLQ situation is very much something which illustrates what I've just been talking about, how things now are still not perfect for the queer community and how we still have a lot of fights to make. After all, if we look at the DC round robin, it was clear to see that there was something going on which was a little bit nefarious in how that particular aspect of the competition went. Namely, the particular matchup of JLQ against a book called Robins, which got more votes than anything in the entire competition. Not just the other books in that round, but anything since going up to the end of the competition. This book's matchup seemed to get more votes than anything else. And yes, a lot of that was people saying they wanted JLQ to exist. And the fact was, being that we are a minority in the kind of competition that favours a majority, a lot of people were fighting hard to try and make it happen. However, the number of votes that this particular matchup got, so much more than any other matchup in the same round or in any of the future rounds, does imply that there were also people purposely voting for the other book just to make sure JLQ didn't happen. Thus, my big takeaway from this particular issue and from that whole situation is that I really hope DC does the right thing and does JLQ anyway. There might be some people out there who will think that the idea of JLQ is actually very similar to my own work for Pride, and that maybe I wouldn't want that kind of competition. And certainly, while there is some truth that it would create an aspect of competition which I may not have had to face as yet, because all of a sudden there will be a superhero team book of all LGBTQ characters as well, this time though as part of the actual DC universe, and naturally a lot more people are probably going to gravitate towards that with existing DC characters that they may be familiar with than independent characters who are completely new. While there is some truth to that, and there is truth in the fact there may be similarities, at the end of the day, I'm not in this to make money. I'm not trying to get rich off it. If I wanted to get rich, I probably wouldn't be making comics. At the end of the day, I make the Pride because it's the right thing to do. And that's what I'm hoping that DC will do here. They will see that it's the right thing to do, even if it doesn't necessarily make them the same crazy amount of money that other books starring Batman characters are likely going to make. It's still the right thing to do because there's a whole audience which doesn't get that kind of representation or chance to shine that other characters do. As such, yes, I entirely hope that yes, the Pride will compete with JLQ one day, vying for the top spot of LGBTQ superhero representation. And you know what? I welcome it. Bring it on. It would be awesome. Not just because, I'm not trying to be big-headed or think that I'm going to win out because I've been around longer or anything like that. I just need more. I need more of it. I want to read this book. I write the Pride. I know how that story goes. I know how that story is going to go for the next decade. I want to read Justice League Queer. So please, 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 DC, please make this book and books for many of the other stories there to continue going forward. To sum it all up, DC Pride also contains numerous pin-ups which are absolutely gorgeous from some of the best artists in the industry, and frankly I really, really hope that they're going to wind up as prints because some of these I really want on my wall. As you can see, I have some vast big empty spaces but I really need to fill up if I can find frames which fit the prints which I already have. So yeah, I really, really want to see more of this from DC, not just Justice League Queer and the other stories being continued in books like Batman Urban Legends or Sensational Wonder Woman or anything like that. I also want to see more of DC Pride. Give us another one next year or the year after. Like, if you're not going to do it every year because there's so many things that you could celebrate DC, do it every other year. Just give us more than one, because there's so much for the LGBTQ community to be seen, so many aspects of our community, and there's so many LGBTQ voices with something to say and so many things left to say. But there's going to be content available for DC Prides for decades, and it's about time we kept that going. In the meantime, if you are looking for something from your comic shop this week and you really want a good fun read, and maybe a lot of different stories to introduce you to a lot of characters you maybe don't know, DC Pride is the book for you. Also, while you're there, a lot of good comic book stores and good bookstores and good online retailers will have the Pride Omnibus as well. So please check that out if you would also like more LGBTQ superhero action for your buck and would like to maybe check out some of the amazing artists that we've had as part of this series. Be sure to check out the Pride Omnibus as well. Absolutely check out DC Pride. It is absolutely astonishing. It's everything we wanted and more. So let's bring it on and let's hope that this will continue far into the future. Anyway, as I say, that's been a lot to discuss and a lot to go over today. So that's why I'm going to end this video here. I'll talk about the other comics I've read this week in another video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please leave a comment below about the things you've enjoyed about DC Pride and what other characters would you like to see in maybe future editions of DC Pride. Do you want to see JLQ happen? Do you want to see it continue? Please leave a comment and let us know. Be sure to hit the like button and to subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. I'll be back to talk about comics I've enjoyed and loved again next week. But in the meantime, I've been Joe Glass. Thank you for checking out Joe Glass Comics. And be sure to stay around and have a happy, marvelous, fabulous Pride Month.